Chris Low, ESPN. Fortunate to have him on the show a lot here on 365 Sports. He joins us again now with Craig and Paul. I'm David Smoke, and the All-American team, the preseason team, was released. Chris, thank you very much for your time. How much of an undertaking is this?
It's actually a lot of fun. I enjoy it. I've done it probably, I guess I took it over for Ivan Maisel several years ago, the preseason, postseason. We do a midseason too. Mm-hmm. And you know what it does? It allows me to talk to a lot of different people in college football, pro scouts, people I've gotten to know over the years, other colleagues of mine in the media who've seen some of these kids play live more than I have. The preseason one is probably even more exhausting because I don't want to just go on simply what players have done at this point. That's certainly a big part of it, but my goal is to look back in December when we do a postseason and say, well, we hit a lot of these guys, and sometimes there are injuries, and sometimes guys come under the radar and have great years. But I like doing it. I like talking to people. I like sort of the debate, this guy or that guy, and we try to do it by position. We try to have two guards, two tackles, an all-purpose player, safeties and corners, not just four DBs. And sometimes when you try to break it down like that, it's a little bit more meticulous.
By the way, we appreciate you doing the offensive line that way instead of just five tackles. Yeah. Like five guys on the offensive line. That's the best part about it.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the biggest position or argument over this guy from all of you that contributed to this?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because as I was doing this and talking to people, I'd have, how it goes. Oh, you gotta have this guy. Oh, you can't have that guy. It was hard. The quarterback position was difficult. It was because there were five guys that I legitimately considered. Again, Beck had a great year last year, but there's also, if you want to play devil's advocate, did he have to do as much as other quarterbacks because they were so good around him? I mean, when you're throwing to Brock Bowers, it's I could probably convert some third downs throwing to that guy.
Right.
And you look at Dylan Gabriel, his experience. I mean, I don't know anybody's played more football or has more experience at the position than him. Certainly, Jalen Milroe was a factor. Quinn Ewers was a guy. I love the guy in Arizona. There were a ton of people that we looked at and thought about, and Shedeur Sanders is another one. So that one was one. It was hard to just get to because I think you could probably make a case for 6 or 7 that should at least be in contention. And then the offensive line. You mentioned the guards and the centers. Those are hard. Tackles sometimes are easier. Will Campbell at LSU is going to be a first rounder. He's played since the day he stepped on campus at LSU. When you start getting into those interior guys, it's a little bit more difficult. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the guru when it comes to interior offensive line play. I try to watch as much as I can. I lean on other people, some people in the media and some people that are former players who played those positions that have watched a lot of these guys. And so there were a bunch of interior offensive linemen that were in the mix. And I feel good about the guys we came up with. I'll say this, Georgia's offensive line, and Dylan Fairchild wasn't even first or second team. He's the other guard for the Dogs. This might be Kirby Smart's best offensive line since he's been there, and that's saying a lot.
Yes, it is. It's saying a heck of a lot for the Dogs there. Chris, one thing that stood out to me immediately, all 5 offensive linemen from the SEC, 3 of the 4 defensive linemen from the SEC. If not for Mason Graham there at Michigan at D-tackle, it would have been a clean sweep. I know they have, every position there's bragging rights to be had, but in the trenches, is that really the big separator you feel like above maybe all else, aside from maybe just pure passion when it comes to the SEC right now versus not necessarily the Big Ten, but most others?
Well, I think they're really good players across the country. And what I try to do is, and I've covered the SEC for a long time. I've covered a lot of the Deep South, the ACC. Is when I talk to people, I always say, listen, this is not a this is not a contest where we're trying to sort of get, okay, so many from the Big 12, so many from the SEC.
Right.
I want the best players. Who are the best players? Who do you think, based on performance at this point, projection, your talks? Because a lot of the guys in the NFL I talk to, I'll give you one example. I talked to a guy who's the college personnel director. I won't say the team. And he was making the rounds, the different campuses this preseason. And so I would talk to him, and he just had left Clemson, or he was going to Georgia. He was going to, to wherever, going to Florida State. And he would say, well, this guy, their offensive line coach or coordinator said this, this, or this. So that's pretty helpful because sort of the way the staffs are thinking. And then you talk to a guy whose job is to evaluate these guys. So after I finish it and I look at it, it jumped out to me, man, we got a lot of SEC guys in the trenches. But then you go back and you look at the draft.
Yeah.
Over the last, forever, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And the guys that are going primarily up high in the trenches are SEC guys. I do think, though, there are other really good players. I mean, you go back to, we're talking about guys that made second team. You go back to, say, Ohio State. See, I think they've got 3 guys in their defensive line. Any 3 of those could be All-American when it's all said and done. And I think, you go secondary too. Denzel Burke was a second-team cornerback. Caleb Williams, who was in the SEC, now he's in the Big Ten. I think if he's not the best safety in America, he's right there in the top 2. So guys are moving around now. Scored is a great example. He was at Purdue last year, led the Big Ten in sacks. Now he's in the SEC at Texas A&M, a kid who grew up, in the shadow of Kyle Field, Bryan, Texas there, and got away. Now he's back. And talking to people on that staff that I trust, talking to NFL people, I think he has massive year this year for the Aggies.
Well, the defensive line that you listed could easily be 4 of the top maybe 11 picks in the draft. Like, I don't see it, like, if everything goes according to plan, Deion Walker, Mason Graham, James Pierce alone could go in the top 5.
Yeah, Mason Graham, he's the one. You guys asked me the toughest choice. I don't think I talked to anybody that I trust, media, pro people, coaches around the country, former players, some of whom are in the media now, but know a whole hell of a lot more about it than I do. I don't think anybody that I talked to when we started talking about interior defensive line did not mention Mason Graham, the first or second. He's a guy, you start talking about who's going to go first in the draft. Maybe it's James Pierce, maybe it's Beck, I don't know. But when you start talking about interior defensive lineman, Mason Graham is the stand. And you go back and put his tape on from the playoff last year against Alabama, against Washington, he was dominant. And I think he'll have that kind of season this year.
Chris, you have Ashton Jeanty from Boise State on the second team as far as the all-purpose behind Travis Hunter. And I follow the young men who play their high school ball in Texas very closely. I'm a huge fan of his. He had a monster year last year. I was just curious kind of what the feedback you received was in terms of Ashton Jeanty, a guy who clearly could have gone in the transfer portal and probably made a lot of money and ended up at a much bigger school than Boise, but decided to stay where he was with the Broncos.
Yeah, and I love that about him. Mm-hmm. I love that loyalty. And that's not, I know everyone's going to say, well, Chris says kids you transfer aren't loyal. I'm not saying that. But I think it's okay to celebrate those kids who do stay. Mm-hmm. And he did. I wish we had an offensive, there was a way to just have an offensive all-purpose guy because he would win clearly. All-purpose, obviously, with Travis Hunter playing defense and offense was, pretty much a no-brainer what he means to Colorado on both sides of the ball. But Jeanty is a guy that if you just put it in his hands, again, talking to people, special teams people who have to defend him, they don't want to see the ball in his hands, period, whether he's returning kicks, whether they're, throwing the ball to him out of the backfield. He can, people I think look at him as a big play guy. He's made a lot of big plays, but he's a tough runner between the tackles. Yep. I think that's where probably there's a misconception about him, is that he's not one of those guys who gets tough yards. Well, he can, which makes him, again, such a versatile threat. To me, and again, I'm not a pro scout. But when you look at what teams in the NFL want to do with backs, play them situationally, be able to have a guy in there who can then throw it to on third down, a guy that is capable of getting yards in the red zone or what have you. And certainly he's proven his worth on special teams too. He, to me, is a guy who would play a ton of snaps for somebody in the NFL.
You know, Chris, I want to do this. And first of all, thanks for jumping on with us. I know we had you back during the Nick Saban decided to retire, but I still want to. I don't think anyone had the access. Nobody had that kind of access that you did, which means a lot. Obviously, with what Saban trusted you to do, but also the way you could write that story. When did you know when did you know that he had retired? Did you know when everyone else found out?
Yeah, I think pretty much. I mean, I don't think Nick even knew 1,000% that day he went to tell his team. He knew he was leaning that way. His wife knew. They'd been off to their place there in Lake Burton, Georgia, but he knew that's sort of the way he was leaning. But I think it's like any of us. When we make a really major decision in our life, I know this is true of me, and you're about to do it, and it's sort of surreal, and you're saying to yourself, am I really about to do this? I think that was sort of the case with him. And he knew the time was right. And yeah, I mean, I found out that day within not too long, really before, right around the time he told his players. He hadn't told many people. He had prepared the people that needed to know. He told his AD that he's probably headed in that direction. Even his family, his daughter Kristen. I think Nick's wife Terry called her and said, "Hey, FYI, I think there's a chance your dad's gonna step down." But so I mean, I don't even know that she knew it for sure that day. But it was. I knew he was thinking about it. I knew he'd been thinking about it for a year or two. He told me when I was with him in, I guess, the week of the SEC championship game when I was in Tuscaloosa that I was kidding him about, I'd be retired before he is. And he looked at me and said, 14-hour days are a lot harder at 72 than they are at 62. And that was a little bit of a hint to me that this time it was pretty serious.
Well, the story and all the stuff you did during that time is great. Also, the All-American team. Thanks for jumping on with us. Late notice that I got back in touch with you to do that. We appreciate it. Enjoy the football season, man. We enjoy your work.
Well, hey, anybody who is friends with Dave Wilson's a friend of mine. Let's put it that way.
Dave Wilson, the storyteller, man. Yeah, we saw him in Vegas, and thank you for saying that, and take care of him, too. Thanks for your time, Chris. Have a great rest of the week.
Okay, you guys do the same. Thank you.
Chris Lowe.